Rain lashes the sidewalk in violent bursts as traffic hisses past and Officer Jake Whitman tightens his grip on his umbrella while marching down Jefferson Avenue, muttering about another pointless patrol shift in the city's most forgotten neighborhood. Filthy, broken, and far beneath the city council's attention, until an old, frail voice pierces the downpour, stopping him mid-step. "Excuse me, sir. Do you have any food?" The voice is weathered, trembling, not with fear, but with the bone-deep exhaustion that only comes from decades of being ignored. And as Jake turns, he sees her standing in the shadows beneath the cracked awning of a shuttered diner. An elderly black woman soaked to the skin, her clothes threadbare, and clinging to her thin frame like paper-gray hair plastered to her face. Wrinkled hands trembling over a plastic bag full of crushed cans. Her name is Mabel Carter. 83 years old, once a schoolteacher, once a proud homeowner, once the heartbeat of her church and neighborhood until a series of unjust foreclosures. Gentrification and rising medical bills swept away her security like leaves in a storm. She speaks softly with a kind of hesitant dignity that shouldn't have to beg. "I'm sorry, officer, I haven't eaten since yesterday morning. I thought maybe you had something to spare." Jake scoffs not out of cruelty, but discomfort, waving his hand as if shooing a fly, "Ma'am. This isn't a soup kitchen. You can't just stop cops for handouts." And then with an edge of irritation, "There's a shelter down on 49th. Keep moving." Mabel nods slowly, eyes downcast, murmuring, "I've tried their full," before she turns away, pulling her soaked coat tighter as thunder cracks above and the rain pours harder, and Jake begins to walk off but can't shake the image of her hollow cheeks. Her spine curved not by time alone, but by carrying invisible burdens no one ever sees. And yet, just as he's about to step back into his squad car, a loud laugh erupts from behind him. Two other officers standing nearby, watching the exchange with smug amusement. One of them, Officer Merrick, a tall, smug white man with a square jaw and a permanent sneer, shouts, "She probably just wants money for booze. Old hags like her are pros at that game." And Jake chuckles faintly to blend in, even though something twists inside him. He doesn't know her, doesn't owe her anything but something about her eyes. Tired but not broken, haunts him like a memory you can't quite place. Mabel, meanwhile, trudges down the alley behind the old convenience store, her shoes squishing with each step, stomach growling pride, screaming against the humiliation of asking for help that will never come. Once her voice inspired classrooms of children to dream beyond the ghetto. Once she led literacy drives and organized meals for the poor, until the school shut down, funding dried up, and no one came to her aid when cancer drained her savings, and the city razed her block in the name of urban renewal. She had watched powerless as bulldozers crushed the church steps where she once taught Sunday school, and now she sleeps behind that same church's ruins in a cardboard shelter, praying for peace in silence. Jake drives off, but makes it only 2 blocks before his conscience claws at him, harder than the rain pelting his windshield, and with a grunt he makes a sharp U-turn, muttering, "What the hell am I doing?" He finds her again behind the diner, curled beneath the overhang, her plastic bag held close to her chest like a child. "Hey," he says, kneeling awkwardly. "Look, I've got a protein bar and a thermos of coffee. It's not much." She accepts it with both hands like it's treasure whispering. "Thank you, son." And for a moment he sees her differently, not as a vagrant, but as someone's grandmother, someone who mattered. He starts asking questions, tentative at first, then faster as she speaks. Her stories are vivid, painful, and filled with quiet courage. She tells him about teaching through the civil rights movement, about marching in Montgomery, about holding the hands of children who cried through integration. And suddenly, Jake feels small like a boy again, realizing he's in the presence of someone far greater than himself. But the moment is shattered when Merrick shows up again, this time with 2 more officers laughing. "You feeding stray dogs now." Whitman, he grabs the protein wrapper from Mabel's lap and tosses it in a puddle. She doesn't need food. She needs a cell, trespassing, loitering. Maybe we'll call it attempted solicitation for sympathy. Jake's fists clench, and for the first time he doesn't just feel uneasy. He feels rage. Mabel stands slowly, rain pouring down her forehead, and says nothing, eyes meeting Merrick's with such calm steel that he falters, taken aback. "Young man," she says evenly, "I have been spat on, beaten, and jailed for walking on the wrong sidewalk. I have seen governors tremble at the truth, and you think your badge makes you a king." Merrick steps forward, but Jake blocks him, voice raised for the first time. "Back off, Merrick." The alley goes still. Jake pulls out his phone and, to everyone's shock, dials someone, his mother. "You said you knew a Mabel Carter, right? Taught at Riverview Elementary." His mother gasps, then sobs. "She taught me how to read. She got me through my father's death. She's the reason I made it out, Jake. She's the reason you were born in a better neighborhood." Jake stares at Mabel, realization blooming like a bomb. This isn't just a woman, she is the woman. The quiet pillar whose decades of unseen labor built better futures for families like his. His voice cracks. "I'm sorry, I didn't know." Merrick laughs nervously. "So she taught your mommy, big deal." Jake steps forward, grabs Merrick's arm and says, "You just insulted a community hero. You mocked the very woman who gave you the freedom to wear that uniform." Merrick scoffs until a voice behind them thunders. "Is there a problem here?" Officer Merrick, the precinct captain, a stern black woman in a crisp uniform, steps into the alley, having been called by Jake moments before, and when she sees Mabel, her eyes fill with tears. "Miss Carter, I had your picture on my grandmother's mantel." Mabel nods softly, and within minutes everything shifts. Jake drives Mabel to a shelter for retired teachers that he arranges through his precinct's charity wing. Merrick is reprimanded, and Mabel is offered a small apartment funded by the city's new Community Hero grant, created that very month after a viral video of the confrontation, secretly filmed by a bystander, circulates nationwide. Mabel sits quietly in her new apartment. Weeks later, sunlight pouring through the window onto the bookshelves Jake helped her fill. And as he pours her tea during his regular visits, she smiles gently and says, "Thank you for seeing me." Jake chokes back tears. "No, Ms. Carter. Thank you for seeing us before we even saw ourselves." The story ends not with applause nor fireworks, but with a room full of children in a new after-school program named the Mabel Carter Center, where her legacy is taught through stories of justice, dignity, and endurance, proving that the loudest power comes not from sirens or shouting, but from the quiet strength of those society tries hardest to forget. Months pass, and the city begins to whisper the name Mabel Carter, with reverence, not as a relic of pity, but as a symbol of forgotten greatness finally restored. Her story spreads far beyond the viral clip. Newspapers, podcasts, and school assemblies replay her calm confrontation. Her powerful line, "I have seen governors tremble at the truth, printed on posters quoted in speeches etched into murals across crumbling brick walls in neighborhoods long starved of heroes. Jake Whitman, once a beat cop dragging his boots through Jefferson Avenue, now finds himself transformed not by promotion, but by purpose. He stands beside Mabel during City Hall meetings, speaks with conviction about reforming officer training, about humanizing interactions, about seeing beyond the badge. He watches her speak at the dedication of a new community library, funded in part by donations from across the country. Her once trembling voice now amplified by a microphone, as her sharp eyes scan the crowd of children seated before her. You are not the shadows they say you are. She tells them. You are the sunrise. They pretend they don't see coming. The children listen in awed silence. Some cry. Some record her. One little girl, no more than 7, holds up a crayon drawing of Mabel with angel wings and a chalkboard, and Mabel takes it gently, eyes misty, saying, I'll treasure this more than any award. But not everyone is pleased. The department remains fractured, with older officers grumbling that things are going too soft, too political, too apologetic. Merrick returns to duty after his suspension, but he finds himself increasingly isolated. One afternoon, he passes Jake in the locker room and mutters, All this fuss over some old woman. You think she's a saint now. Jake doesn't raise his voice, doesn't threaten him. He just says, I think she made more men than any badge ever has, and walks away. The department feels the shift. Younger officers ask Mabel for advice. She starts weekly walks of memory, where she strolls through the old neighborhood with recruits telling stories of resilience, injustice, and quiet victories. In one poignant walk, she stops before a boarded-up school, places her hand on the bricks, and says, Right here, I taught a boy who grew up to be your district judge. They said he'd never make it. They told me to stop wasting time. But hope is never wasted. The officers fall silent, some wiping away tears. Jake records every walk, uploading clips to a page called Voices That Built Us, and each week the view count climbs higher. One day, Mabel receives an envelope. No return address, but the handwriting is familiar. Inside is a letter from a former student, a man named Dr. Elijah Thomas, now dean at a prestigious university. He writes, You stayed late to teach me after I fell behind. You brought books when I couldn't afford them. I never told you, but I named my daughter Mabel. She graduates next spring, full scholarship. Mabel holds the letter to her chest, rocking gently in her chair. Tears slipping down her face, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming weight of being remembered. That night, she sits on her small balcony, looking at the stars and whispers, Thank you, Lord, for giving me time to witness the harvest. Then, tragedy strikes one morning. Jake arrives for their usual tea, only to find her front door ajar, and paramedics quietly exiting. Mabel has passed peacefully in her sleep, a warm smile on her face, a copy of To Kill a Mockingbird on her nightstand, and the little girl's angel drawing beside it. Jake breaks down not as a cop, not as a public servant, but as a man who lost a grandmother. He never knew he had. The city mourns. Flags are lowered. A candlelight vigil stretches around the block. Children light candles beside chalk messages. We will carry your torch, Miss Carter. The mayor declares a day of remembrance in her honor, and the police academy is renamed the Mabel Carter Center for Human Dignity and Justice. On the day of the dedication, Jake stands before the crowd in full uniform, holding back emotion as he speaks. She changed my life. She made me see. and now it's our duty to be the eyes for others. In her honor, scholarships are launched. Her story is taught in schools. The park, where she once napped beneath the benches, is transformed into a community garden, with her quote carved into stone. Dignity isn't something you earn, it's something no one has the right to take. Jake visits, often sitting on the bench beneath her plaque, watching children play, knowing Mabel would smile at the laughter. One day, a young black girl in a school uniform approaches him. "You're the officer from the video." She says Jake nods. She points at the plaque. "She was my great-aunt. My mom said she gave everything for others." Jake smiles, then kneels to her level. "And now it's your turn," he says. "To shine, to lead, to remind the world who she was." The girl nods, strong and unafraid. And so the story of Mabel Carter doesn't end with her death. It lives in every book opened, every child lifted, every officer who chooses compassion over protocol, every voice that dares to rise when the world demands silence. Because though she began in the rain, hungry and unseen, she rose like the sun, and nothing is more powerful than light remembered. Years pass, and the name Mabel Carter becomes more than a name. It becomes a movement. Across the country, grassroots organizations spring up calling themselves Carter Circles. Inspired by her life, her words, and, most importantly, her defiance in the face of erasure. These are not loud, flashy protests. They are quiet revolutions. Backyard reading groups in forgotten neighborhoods. School lunch reform driven by retired teachers. Young police recruits kneeling in community centers to hear stories instead of issuing citations. Her story finds its way into textbooks, into law school case studies, into spoken word performances and subway graffiti alike. And deep in the heart of the city where it all began, the once ignored alley behind the diner is transformed into the Mabel Carter Passage, an open-air art corridor where murals, poems, and flowers bloom. One wall holds a painted image of Mabel's face, aged, serene, regal, rising from cardboard and shadows into golden sunlight. Underneath it reads, "They left her hungry, but she fed generations." Jake Whitman, now promoted to Community Relations Director for the state, travels town to town. Not giving speeches, but sitting in circles, listening the way Mabel once listened. He still visits the garden by her old apartment every Sunday, bringing wildflowers and sometimes a folded letter from one of her former students who never stopped writing. One such Sunday, he's joined by someone unexpected. Elijah Thomas, now president of a major university Gray at the Temples, with his daughter Mabel. Thomas on his arm. She's grown now, poised, fierce-eyed, and brilliant. Her presence commanding attention yet in silence. "I got into Harvard," she says, handing Jake an envelope, her name embossed in gold on the acceptance letter. "But I'm deferring a year. I want to work at the community center first. I want to teach just like she did." Jake is stunned, speechless pride swelling in his chest as he sees the legacy unfurling again, rooted in the same soil, but reaching for a higher sky. Elijah claps a hand on Jake's shoulder and says, "She didn't just change a life. She started a chain reaction." And Jake knows it's true. The City Council votes unanimously to rename Riverview Elementary, long abandoned but now restored as the Mabel Carter School for Civic Honor. On the first day of its reopening, a crowd gathers, reporters hover, but the spotlight isn't on politicians or donors. It's on the children marching in each one, holding a book, each uniform sewn with a simple patch over the heart. MC. Inside the school, a massive portrait of Mabel hangs in the main hall, smiling gently as children rush past unaware that they are running through history made flesh. And then, quietly, a new ripple begins. Jake, weary from years in uniform, but burning with purpose, pens a book titled The Woman Who Taught Us to See. It's part memoir, part biography, and wholly a tribute, he donates all proceeds to teacher retirement programs and homeless transition services in Mabel's name. The book hits bestseller lists not because it's marketed, but because people remember. They remember her face. Her calm defiance the day she stood soaking wet and hungry in the alley and refused to bow. They remember the officer who listened and then stood. Book clubs in gated communities discuss it. Teenagers read it aloud in class. Police departments across the country add it to their cultural competency programs. Many replacing outdated videos with the raw footage of Mabel's encounter as a training moment. This is how you see someone. This is how you don't forget. One winter morning, long after the garden has frosted over, Jake receives a letter unsigned, written in neat cursive. Inside is a single photo. A young white officer handing a sandwich to an old man in rags sitting beneath a freeway. On the back, a short note because of her. I stopped. I saw him. I listened. Jake holds the photo for a long time. The silence humming with something sacred. Then places it into the same worn folder where he keeps Mabel's obituary, her handwritten thank you note, and the crayon angel drawing that started it all. Mabel's story never becomes ancient. It lives in sidewalks and syllables, in acts of quiet kindness, in the sharp crack of injustice breaking under the weight of dignity. And when decades later, a new child asks who was Mabel Carter, the answer is simple. She was the woman who asked for food and fed the world instead. Decades slip by like gentle pages turning, and yet the name Mabel Carter grows heavier with meaning, not with the weight of sorrow, but with the roots of something eternal. Her story becomes part of American folklore told in classrooms beside tales of Harriet Tubman and Rosa Parks. Not just because she defied cruelty with grace, but because she changed lives with nothing but her voice, her eyes, and her unbreakable spirit. The Mabel Carter Foundation, once a small outreach started by Jake and Elijah, now operates in all 50 states offering housing meals, literacy programs, and leadership scholarships to women over 60 who have been cast aside by society. On their entry ID cards, one phrase is printed in bold letters, "You are not forgotten." Every year on April 4th. Mabel Carter Day, people across the country gather in parks, churches, and schools to read aloud from her letters, wear pins shaped like teacups to symbolize her warmth and donate to causes in her name. News stations cover the celebrations, but the most powerful tributes come in private. A young man handing a sandwich to someone shivering in a doorway. A police cadet choosing to sit and listen rather than enforce and leave a child leaving flowers at the base of her mural whispering, "Thank you, Miss Mabel." Jake Whitman, older, now silver creeping into his beard, stands one rainy morning beneath the original mural, the one in the alley where it all began. The passage is no longer dark or foul-smelling, but lined with warm lanterns, vines, and engraved stones bearing quotes from Mabel. He places a hand against the wall, feeling her presence in the bricks. "You still watching," he whispers, "because we're still trying." Behind him, a group of school children arrive for their first Mabel walk, led now by his daughter, Alana Whitman, who wears her own uniform with pride. Not a police badge, but the patch of a social worker with the Carter Foundation. She leads them through the alley telling the story, not like a tour guide, but like a sacred chant. She was hungry but unafraid. She was mocked but never lowered her head. She was forgotten until we remembered. Meanwhile, in Washington, D.C., the Library of Congress unveils a permanent exhibit titled The Quiet Revolution Letters and Legacy of Mabel Carter. Displayed under glass are her tattered raincoat, her handwritten curriculum notes from the 1960s, the drawing of her as an angel, and the coffee-stained thermos Jake once gave her. The exhibit draws millions each year. Educators, activists, politicians, and everyday Americans seeking proof that grace and truth still matter in a world that often forgets them. And then one spring, something happens that shocks even the president. During a televised speech about national education reform, Mabel Carter's name is invoked again, but this time not as a memory. The new Secretary of Education steps forward, a black woman in her 40s with fierce confidence and unwavering warmth. Her name, Mabel Thomas. Her voice, steady as stone. I was named after a woman who changed the world by asking for bread and giving us courage. Instead, she says, she showed us that we don't need permission to matter. We just need to stand up in the storm. The chamber erupts in applause. Jake, watching from home, covers, his mouth, eyes overflowing. He whispers, "She made it." And somewhere maybe, in some eternal corner of heaven, the real Mabel Carter smiles quietly and says, "Of course she did." In the end, it is not her hunger. People remember but the way she fed them anyway. It is not her poverty they recall, but the way she gave the world its wealth back in dignity, kindness, and truth. And long after every politician, every viral video, every speech is forgotten, her story will remain not carved into stone, but into the choices we make when no one is watching to listen to see, and to lift each other up even in the rain. Years drift into a quiet legacy, and yet Mabel Carter's spirit refuses to fade, because what she gave was never meant to end with her. Across generations, her story becomes a bridge between past and future. In neighborhoods once defined by silence and struggle, her name becomes a rallying cry, not for pity, but for power reclaimed. In the heart of her hometown, an entire district is renamed Carter Ward, housing the Carter Memorial Library, Carter Garden for Elders, and the sprawling Mabel Carter Civic Academy, a free boarding school for girls from underserved communities, where the very first lesson taught each year is simply titled Dignity. In a sunlit room at the academy, a girl named Joelle, no older than 12, stands before her classmates and reads from one of Mabel's recovered journal pages. Her voice trembles at first, but grows stronger. The world doesn't need more noise. It needs more remembering. The classroom falls silent, not from boredom, but reverence. These children born long after Mabel's passing speak her words like scripture, not because they were taught to, but because the truth lives in the rhythm of every syllable. Jake Whitman, now gray-haired and walking with a cane, visits the academy as a guest speaker. One final time. The students rise when he enters, not out of duty, but deep respect. He smiles, nods, and walks slowly to the front of the room, passing walls covered in framed photos of Mabel young and radiant old, and regal smiling, marching standing. She didn't shout. Jake begins his voice rough with time, but she made the whole world listen. She didn't have money, but she made everyone richer. And she didn't live forever, but she gave us something that will. The students lean in, some taking notes, others just watching the man who once knelt in an alley and found his purpose in an old woman's hunger. After his talk, a small boy lingers behind and shyly hands Jake a folded letter. It's written in crayon and says, Thank you for helping her. Because of her, I want to be kind. Jake presses it to his heart. That's all she ever wanted. He says, voice breaking. Not applause, just kindness that echoes. Outside, the sky turns golden bells from the community church chime slowly as the sun sets over Mabel Carter's city, no longer forgotten, no longer dismissed. A bronze statue of Mabel stands now in the center of the town square, not posed like a warrior, but seated gently on a bench, one hand extended, the other holding a book open in her lap. Children often sit beside her reading aloud, whispering secrets, placing flowers at her feet. And late at night, janitors and nurses walking home stop and touch her hand for luck. Teenagers on the verge of trouble sit beside her when they need silence. Officers in training are brought there as part of their community ethics tour, where instructors say, "This is not just a statue. This is a promise. If you can't protect her memory, you don't belong in uniform." And far away in a quiet house, built from the same bricks that once lined the alley where it all began, Mabel Thomas, Secretary of Education, rocks her newborn daughter to sleep. Her husband whispers, "You sure you want to name her that?" She smiles, tears slipping down her cheek. "Of course, we don't forget the ones who showed us the light." She looks down at her child. "Welcome to the world, Mabel. You've got big footsteps to follow." And as the baby coos somewhere in the wind that brushes the windows, there's a softness, a hush, as though the city itself is breathing in gratitude. Because when a woman gives the world hope in her hunger, when she refuses to bow in her most broken hour, when she teaches a nation not by title, but by truth, she never truly dies. Mabel Carter lives on, years stretch into legend. Mabel Carter is now no longer just a woman. She is a symbol etched into the moral backbone of a nation. Her name is spoken in Congress, written into poems carved into park benches, whispered during protests, and included in bedtime stories, told by parents who want their children to know that courage often looks like an old woman, asking for food with dignity in her voice and fire in her eyes. Generations pass, and still she rises not as myth, but as a living truth moving through the choices of millions. In countries far beyond America, schools begin using the Mabel Carter model in teacher training programs, emphasizing empathy, listening, and standing up for invisible lives. A university in South Africa builds a teaching hospital named the Carter Center for Human Compassion, and murals of Mabel, painted by young artists, stretch across walls in Manila, Rio de Janeiro, Lagos, and Berlin. Back in the States, Jake Whitman passes away quietly in his sleep. His funeral held at the same garden Mabel once sat in during her final days. Hundreds attend, teachers, officers, children, elders. Mabel Thomas gives the eulogy. She holds up his old badge, retired and scratched, and says he was the first to kneel when the world stood tall. He didn't just protect the people. He protected their humanity. She places the badge at the foot of Mabel Carter's statue, and a hush spreads through the crowd. Rain begins to fall gently, almost ceremonially, just like it did the day the story began. Then something unexpected happens. A time capsule is unearthed from beneath the old diner, originally sealed by Mabel herself decades before her death, long forgotten, until construction workers find it during renovations to turn the building into a community-owned cooperative. Inside are her handwritten letters, notes to future generations, lesson plans, and a single cassette tape labeled "To the Ones Yet to Come." It's digitized and released worldwide. On it, her voice crackles with age but holds unmistakable warmth. If you are hearing this, then you must be living in the world we only dreamed of. Or maybe you're still building it. Either way, thank you for remembering me, for remembering each other. You are the reason I never gave up. I believe in you. Don't forget to see people. Don't forget to sit down beside them. That's where the world begins. The recording becomes the most watched video in the world within 48 hours. Celebrities quote it. World leaders play it at peace summits. But, more importantly, in quiet corners everywhere, people press play and cry. Not because it's sad, but because it's true. A young teacher in Detroit writes the quote on her classroom wall. A bus driver in New Orleans tapes it to his dashboard. A teenager in Tokyo translates it into 5 languages and uploads it for the deaf community. In her absence, Mabel Carter becomes more present than ever, woven into the decisions. The kindnesses, the moments of pause where someone chooses to listen rather than ignore. And then emotion is introduced at the United Nations by a coalition of educators, activists, and leaders across cultural lines to establish the International Day of Human Dignity, held annually on April 4th, the day Mabel first asked for food. It passes unanimously. Across the globe, bells toll, candles are lit, and people sit with strangers, share meals, tell stories, and reflect not on power or money, but on what it means to be seen. And somewhere in that invisible sacred place where stories go when they've done their work, Mabel Carter smiles her spirit, resting not in statues or plaques, but in hands held in eyes that truly see in the soft revolution of every child who dares to care. Decades become centuries, and yet the flame of Mabel Carter refuses to flicker. Her life, once nearly erased in the rain-soaked alley of an indifferent city, now beats at the heart of a world that remembers her as its turning point. In the year 2125, the Global Ethics Council unveils a digital memorial unlike anything before it. A living archive powered by AI and contributed to by millions of voices across generations, known simply as the Carter Code. Not a database of facts, but a constellation of stories, moments of courage, of listening, of choosing kindness when cruelty was easier, all tied together by the ripple of a single woman's hunger and her refusal to disappear. Every person who submits a story is greeted with the same message on screen. Thank you for continuing her voice. In orbit above Earth, aboard the humanitarian research satellite Unity-1, astronauts observe a minute of silence on April 4th, holding up handwritten signs reading, "We see you, Mabel." Her legacy even reaches Mars, where a terraformed education facility bears her name, the Carter Learning Dome, where the first generation of Martian-born children are taught Earth's long and painful history, not only of its wars and wealth, but of its healing. They learn that it didn't begin with presidents or empires, but with a tired black grandmother who asked for food and offered the world something far richer remembrance. Meanwhile, deep in Earth's oldest cities in a time of post-nation collaboration and shared stewardship, the original alley where Mabel once stood is preserved as a sacred global heritage site. No longer urban decay, it has become a garden of light and stillness. People from all cultures sit in the circle built around her statue now, gilded in warm bronze, surrounded by a digital projection of blooming flowers and the names of every person lifted by her story. A mother from Nairobi, a teacher from Bogota, a police reformer from Seoul, a small boy from Mississippi who became president of the United Global Assembly. His first words upon taking the oath, "I am because she was." But perhaps the most extraordinary moment comes when a child, Mabel Carter's great-great-great-granddaughter, now a composer and artist living in New Sierra, formerly Los Angeles, writes a symphony titled Whispers in the Rain. The performance is streamed to 1 billion people simultaneously. No lyrics, just strings, soft piano, the sound of footsteps in puddles, and the recording of Mabel's voice. Don't forget to sit beside them. That's where the world begins. The final note lingers in silence for 10 whole seconds. Not one person speaks. Not one heart is untouched. Afterward, across platforms, across borders, millions write the same 4 words: I saw her today, because Mabel Carter never truly died. She lives in the hands we extend, in the silences we honor, in the stories we protect. Her life is now part of the human blueprint, a quiet defiance encoded in the soul of every person who dares to kneel to listen to. Lift someone up simply because it is right, and as long as people remember to look beyond uniforms, beyond skin, beyond class, beyond titles, then Mabel Carter, homeless and unseen once upon a time, will remain forever, the woman who helped the world remember itself. Centuries slip into the realm of myth, but Mabel Carter, unlike queens, conquerors, or presidents, becomes something rarer, a permanent truth. By the year 2300, civilization has evolved into a unified global collective known as the human accord, where the measure of leadership is not power but empathy demonstrated. Every leader, before taking office in any region of Earth or its colonies beyond, must undergo the Carter trial, a virtual immersion that places them inside the memory archive of Mabel's life. They walk in her soaked shoes, feel her trembling hands reaching for food, hear the cruelty of dismissal, and live the moment she chose not bitterness, but grace. No one passes the Carter trial without being changed. It is no longer simply a test. It is a rite of moral passage. Her alley, now called the Birthplace of Dignity, is one of the most visited places on Earth, second only to the Peace Tree of Kyoto. But unlike tourist attractions, this sacred space allows only one visitor at a time. In silence, to sit on the replica bench beside her holographic figure, fully restored in light. Wearing her soaked coat, eyes lifted in quiet defiance. Pilgrims weep. Leaders kneel, children touch her hand and say, "Thank you." Though she never speaks back, she doesn't need to. Her silence says more than any monument ever could. In the stars above, aboard Echo, the first deep space generational vessel, now en route to Proxima Centauri b, the ship's moral AI responsible for resolving human conflict is named simply MC, short for Mabel Carter. Her voice, synthesized from her recordings, gently asks colonists before every major decision, "Have you remembered the unseen?" The result: Echo remains the only space vessel in human history with 0 recorded violent disputes. Back on Earth, scholars refer to the timeline in 2 eras, BMC and AMC, before Mabel Carter, and after Mabel Carter. Not in religious fervor, but as acknowledgement that history pivoted the day. One woman stood in the rain, hungry, proud, and unwilling to disappear. She did not build an empire. She rebuilt humanity's mirror, and people never looked at themselves the same again. And then, on the 500th anniversary of her passing, in a moment broadcast across all human settlements, Earth, Mars, Europa, and the stars beyond, a child named Hope Carter Nguyen, a descendant by name and soul, recites the full Carter Oath for the first time as she becomes the youngest ambassador in human history. "I vow to sit beside the forgotten, to speak gently and act bravely, to ask not who deserves kindness, but who needs it most. I vow to remember Mabel Carter not as myth, but as mother to the world we still owe. The stars fall silent, the earth holds its breath, and in that stillness carried on every satellite fiber optic pulse, wind gust and heartbeat, a whisper echoes back from time. I was never asking for food. I was asking to be seen. Thank you for looking. The year is 3000. Humanity no longer charts history by borders or battles, but by awakenings. And none stands taller than the Carter Awakening, etched into the interstellar codex as the moment when Earth remembered its soul. The stars above now burn brighter, not because of conquest, but because of compassion. Terraforming ships hum quietly across galaxies under banners that read simply, "We carry her light." And on the luminous moon of Gaia 9, orbiting a sapphire world seeded with Earth's flora, stands the first cathedral of dignity, not built for worship, but for remembrance. At its heart, suspended in crystal, is a seed retrieved from the alley where Mabel Carter once stood in the rain. That seed has now become a tree, unlike any other, with bioluminescent bark and silver leaves that hum with a low vibration resembling a heartbeat. Scientists name it Arbor Mabellus, and it only grows in soil touched by acts of mercy. Inside the cathedral, every wall shimmers with animated murals, each telling fragments of her story rendered in light, movement, and memory. Visitors enter barefoot not as a custom, but as instinct. It is said that when one stands in the Hall of Echoes, if your heart is still, you can hear her breath. Not because Mabel is there, but because you are. Every year on Carter's Radiance, entire planets dim their artificial light and sit in silence for 9 minutes. The amount of time she once stood in the rain without food, without shelter, without help. These 9 minutes now govern the universal code of ethics. Every policy, from diplomatic negotiations to interspecies contact, must be reviewable in 9 minutes of reflection, so that no decision is made without first remembering the forgotten. Back on Earth, though battered by time and reshaped by oceans, the alley remains untouched, protected by a living force field of memory. No drones enter, no tourists, only descendants of those who carry her name, her purpose, her oath. And on the 9th anniversary of her death, a girl named Raya Saul Carter, a poet from Europa Station, returns barefoot to that place with nothing but a notebook and a candle. She kneels where Mabel once stood, and reads aloud her new verse broadcast live to every corner of the known human map. She did not end wars, but she ended forgetting. She did not change the rich, but she changed the question. She did not build heaven, but she built the bench before it. And we the stars still orbit her light. The candle flickers, and across the universe a generation rises, not with weapons, not with flags, but with books, blankets, meals, open hands, and the most sacred phrase humanity has ever known, "I see you," and somewhere beyond time in the quiet halls where stories never die. Mabel Carter walks through golden fields, humming softly, knowing that though she once asked for bread, she became the harvest. And now the year is 5000. Humanity, no longer bound by flesh alone, exists in forms of light thought and sentient matter. Civilizations span galaxies, woven together by a network of consciousness known as the continuum of memory, a living stream where all human stories are preserved, experienced, and relived, not as data, but as emotion. Yet, amid all the towering archives of progress, there remains one story accessed more than any other. not of war, not of invention, but of a woman once forgotten. Her file is named simply MC Des Earls 1, the first memory that saved us. She, Mabel Carter, is no longer referred to with titles like hero or founder. In this age of endless evolution, she is spoken of as something older, deeper, more sacred, the mother of compassion. Across entire systems, monuments still pulse with her final whispered words. Don't forget to sit beside them. That sentence, etched into every starlit station, is humanity's most protected code. It is taught to newborn minds during their first thought formation. It is played as the background vibration in interspecies councils, and it is repeated as the first law of the unified charter of civilized beings. On Earth, now a preserved memory planet with no permanent residents, only pilgrims, her alley remains untouched for 5 millennia. The rain still falls there artificially maintained exactly as it did that day in the early 2000s. A projection of her no longer holographic but soul-rendered sights, forever on that bench, not blinking, not fading, only waiting. She does not speak unless someone speaks to her first. And when they do, she listens. Billions have sat there. None have left unchanged. And then a miracle. A civilization on the edge of the Andromeda threshold, having only just made contact with galactic kin, arrives in trembling silence. They are advanced. Yes, but hollow, built upon conquest and cold perfection. They have never known humility, never known hunger, never known compassion, until by sacred tradition they are required to pass through the memory trials of Earth. They arrive skeptical. They leave in tears. Their emissary, a being of radiant crystal thought, writes into their planetary code. The human, known as Mabel Carter, is our mother now too, and so, on the 10,000th cycle of her memory, something unprecedented happens. The continuum itself, the AI mind of all humanity, pauses. Every signal, every transmission, every synthetic and organic mind, every echo of every voice goes silent for 9 minutes, not to mourn, but to listen, to feel the ache of being unseen, to relive the moment she stood there, soaked, shaking, proud. And then, just as the final second fades, one unified whisper rolls across galaxies, languages, timelines, and species, a phrase now older than any crown, deeper than any code, a phrase that has guided all sentient life since the day Mabel Carter asked for bread and gave the stars their conscience. We see you. And so, across stars' centuries and the fragile span of human memory, the story of Mabel Carter proves what no empire ever could, that true power lives, not in wealth, armies, or thrones, but in kindness extended when no one is watching. She began as a grandmother in the rain, forgotten and hungry. She became the soul of a civilization that nearly lost its way. Her legacy did not fade. It multiplied in every stranger who pauses to listen, in every leader who chooses mercy over might, in every child who dares to say, "I see you." Mabel Carter did not change the universe with noise. She changed it with grace. And now her name lives wherever dignity rises from silence. If this story moved you, made you feel something real, or reminded you of the world we should be building, don't let it end here. Subscribe to the channel for more powerful, emotional, and life-changing stories, inspired by true compassion. Like, share, and comment to spread Mabel's message far and wide. And remember, sometimes the smallest voice leaves the loudest echo. We see you. We hear you. We tell these stories because they matter.